The decision that cost Nelson Mandela 27 years. Picture a man standing in a courtroom. Not trembling. Not begging. Not searching the room for an exit that no longer exists. Just standing. Still as stone. Eyes forward. The year is 1964. The place is Pretoria, South Africa. And the man standing in that dock already knows what the judge is about to say. He has known for weeks. His lawyers know. His wife knows. His country knows. He will most likely spend the rest of his life in prison. And yet, when they give him the chance to speak, he does not reach for mercy. He does not bargain. He does not lower his voice. He speaks as though the courtroom is a stage and history itself is the audience. There is a version of this story where Nelson Mandela is simply a hero, a freedom fighter, a saint who suffered and then triumphed, a face on a wall, a line in a textbook. But that version does something terrible to the truth. It makes his sacrifice look inevitable, comfortable, safe. It removes the terror of the choice. Because what happened in that courtroom, and in the years that led to it, was not the story of a man fulfilling a destiny. It was the story of a man who made a decision, eyes wide open, knowing exactly what it would cost him, and paid every single cent. This was the moment Nelson Mandela chose power, and lost everything. Before he was a symbol, he was a boy. Born in the rural village of Mvizo in the Transkei region, on the 18th of July, 1918. His father was a chief of the Thembu people, a man of standing, of tradition, of stories carried in the bloodline for generations. His birth name was Ralilala. In his language it means, roughly, one who pulls branches from a tree. A troublemaker, as though even the name knew. When his father died, the young boy was taken under the wing of the acting regent of the Thembu, a man named Janjantaba Dalandibo. It was an act of both charity and recognition. The boy was smart. Unusually so. Quick-eyed and fast-thinking, he absorbed everything around him. And one of the things he absorbed, at those long evening meetings where tribal elders gathered to discuss the concerns of the community, was something about the nature of power. He watched those meetings carefully. He noticed that the regent never spoke first. He listened. He let every voice be heard, the farmer, the teacher, the widow. And only when the room had exhausted itself did the regent speak, weaving the conversation into a direction. A leader, the boy understood, is not the loudest voice. A leader is the last voice. The voice that shapes what was said by all the others. That lesson would follow him for 70 years. His path took him first to mission schools, then to the University of Fort Hare, one of the only places in the country where a black man could pursue a university degree in the 1940s. There, for the first time, he moved among students from across the continent, young men burning with questions about justice, about dignity, about why, in the country of their birth, their futures were rationed by the color of their skin. He was expelled. Not for failure, but for participation in a student boycott over university conditions. Even then, he would not be silent. He made his way to Johannesburg, the great city, the engine of South African ambition and inequality, both running at full power, simultaneously, in every street. He worked as a guard at a mine. He saw men who looked like his father, like his uncles, like himself, strong men, skilled men, reduced by a system of laws and permits and curfews and passes into something not quite human in the eyes of the law. Men who had to produce a piece of paper simply to walk on a public street. Men who were paid a fraction of what white workers earned for the same labor. Men who lived in compounds, separated from their families for months at a time, so that the machinery of profit could keep turning. He had known injustice in the abstract. Now he saw it daily, in the flesh, in the faces of men too tired to be angry anymore. He became a lawyer. It was a radical act in 1944. No black lawyer had been admitted to the Johannesburg bar before. He pushed through anyway, with the stubbornness that would define his entire life, and set up practice alongside his friend Oliver Tambo, the first black law firm in the city. Their office became something more than an office. It became a shelter. A place where people who had been trampled by the machinery of apartheid could come and find someone who spoke their language and understood the machinery well enough to fight it. He joined the African National Congress, the ANC, and became one of the founders of its youth league. Young, passionate, impatient. He was done with the polite petitions that the older generation of the ANC had been sending to the government for decades. He believed, at this stage, that organized, disciplined, non-violent mass resistance could break the system. That if enough people refused to cooperate with laws that stripped them of their humanity, the system would have no choice but to bend. He was 31 years old. He still believed in the negotiating table. That belief was about to be tested by fire. In 1948, the National Party won the South African general election. To understand what that means, you need to understand what they were offering the white electorate. Not just a policy. Not just a platform. A philosophy. A system. A word. Apartheid. Separateness. Total, legalized, enforced racial segregation. Not merely the informal racism that had always existed, but racism codified into law, brick by brick, act by act, until it became the architecture of an entire country. The Population Registration Act classified every person by race at birth. The Group Areas Act determined where each race could live. The pass laws required every black South African to carry a passbook at all times, a document granting or denying permission to exist in their own country. They built the prison before they built the crime. Mandela and the ANC responded with mass campaigns. The Defiance Campaign of 1952 was the most organized and disciplined act of civil disobedience in South African history. Black citizens deliberately using whites-only facilities, refusing to carry passes, submitting themselves to arrest. 50,000 people joined. The government responded by banning him, restricting his movements, forbidding him from attending gatherings, from speaking publicly. The peaceful resistance continued. In 1955, the Freedom Charter was adopted, a vision of a democratic, non-racial South Africa that reads, even today, like a document written in the full knowledge that those who signed it might die for it. And then came March 21, 1960. Sharpeville, a township south of Johannesburg. A crowd of black South Africans had gathered to peacefully protest the pass laws. No weapons. No violence. They were there to protest a law that made them feel subhuman every day they carried those books. The police opened fire. 69 people died. Most of them shot in the back. Running away. The world was horrified. For a moment, it seemed like the international outcry would force the South African government to reconsider, to soften, to yield. Instead, they declared a state of emergency. They arrested thousands. They went harder. And in the days after Sharpeville, Nelson Mandela sat with that silence. The silence of 69 people who had done nothing wrong, and felt something shift inside him. Because here was the brutal arithmetic of what he had lived through. Years of peaceful protest, of campaigns, of petitions, of disciplined nonviolence, and the government's response had been not to yield but to tighten. At what point does your refusal to fight back simply make it easier for them to keep hurting you? It was not a conclusion he arrived at easily. It was not a conclusion he wanted to arrive at. But Sharpeville had spoken a language that moral force could not answer. And Mandela began to listen. There is a question that haunts every person who has ever tried to change an unjust system, and it is this. What do you do when every peaceful option has failed? When the door you have knocked on politely for 20 years is not just closed but nailed shut? When the system you are fighting has demonstrated, beyond any remaining doubt, that it will not be persuaded, only forced? This is not a hypothetical question for philosophers. This is the question that cost Nelson Mandela 27 years of his life. In 1961, With the ANC banned and the movement fractured, Mandela made the decision that would define the rest of his existence. He helped form a new organization, a covert military wing of the ANC, called Umkhonto we Sizwe. The name is precise. Deliberate. A spear, not a bomb. A targeted instrument, not an instrument of terror. Because Mandela was careful about something that has often been misread in the popular account of this period. He was not abandoning the moral core of the struggle. He was redefining what moral action meant in a system that responded only to force. The initial strategy of Umkhonto we Sizwe was sabotage, attacks on infrastructure, on power lines, on government buildings. Not on people. The explicit, deliberate, written goal was to avoid civilian casualties. But the government did not appreciate the distinction. Mandela spent the early 1960s underground, moving between safe houses, disguised, operating in secret, becoming the figure the press would call the Black Pimpernel. And then, in August 1962, he was arrested. He was charged initially with inciting workers to strike and leaving the country without a passport. He received a 5-year sentence. But while he was in prison, the police scored a devastating breakthrough. In July 1963, they raided a farm in Rivonia, the operational headquarters of Umkhonto we Sizwe. They found documents, plans, evidence of sabotage operations, evidence connecting Mandela directly to the leadership of the armed resistance. They charged Mandela and 9 others with sabotage and conspiracy to overthrow the government. In South Africa in 1963, this was a capital charge. They could hang him. Now pause here. Hold that thought in your hands for a moment. Nelson Mandela is in prison, already serving 5 years. The state is about to try him on charges that carry the death penalty. The evidence against him is substantial. His lawyers are terrified. He has options. He can disavow the armed resistance. He can express remorse. He can argue that the documents were misrepresented. He can perform the contrition the court is looking for and purchase, if not freedom, at least survival. He does none of this. Instead, on the 20th of April 1964, standing in the Rivonia trial dock, Nelson Mandela does something that defies every instinct of self-preservation. He admits everything. He admits his role in founding Umkhonto we Sizwe. He admits the organization's strategy of sabotage. He admits that he trained to become a guerrilla. He does not flinch from a single fact. And then, in the statement that would echo through decades, through generations, I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons will live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. Read those words again. Not the words of a man asking for mercy. Not the words of a man performing heroism for the cameras. These are the words of a man who has made his accounting, who has looked at the scales and accepted what they hold. He is not claiming to be a saint. He is not claiming to be without fault. He is saying, I know what I have done. I know why I have done it, and I would do it again. The courtroom was silent. Even the prosecutor was silent. Because in that silence, something had shifted in the room that no legal argument could address. The state had wanted to try a criminal. Instead, they were confronted with a man who had just transformed a criminal trial into a moral reckoning. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment. Power is not control. Power is not force. Power is the willingness to stand in a courtroom, knowing you are about to lose everything, and speak the truth anyway. Because truth, once spoken clearly, cannot be unspoken. Robben Island. A place whose name has become a kind of shorthand for endurance. A rocky outcrop in Table Bay, off the coast of Cape Town, 7 kilometers from the mainland. Close enough that, on a clear day, you could see the mountain. Far enough that the mountain might as well have been the moon. The cell was 7 feet square. A mat on the floor. A bucket in the corner. A small window through which, on certain mornings, the light came in at such an angle that it looked almost merciful. It was not merciful. For the first few years, he was allowed 1 visitor every 6 months. 1 letter every 6 months. The letters were read by censors who sometimes blacked out entire paragraphs for reasons that were never explained. He was classified as a Category D prisoner, the lowest classification. He was given short pants to wear, because the administration considered black South Africans to be boys, not men. He refused the short pants. Eventually, they gave him long trousers. Small victories. The kind you have to learn to count when large ones are unavailable. During the day, he worked. He and the other prisoners were taken to a limestone quarry and made to break rock. The glare off the white limestone was so intense that it permanently damaged his eyesight. He would wear sunglasses for the rest of his life. His mother died during his imprisonment. He was not allowed to attend the funeral. His eldest son, Thembi, died in a car accident. He was not allowed to attend the funeral. Think about what this means for a moment. Think about the particular cruelty of being prevented from attending a funeral. Of having your grief interrupted by a locked door. That is what was taken from him. Not freedom in the abstract. Freedom in the particular, grinding, daily, human sense of the word. And yet, something happened on Robben Island that no one on the other side of those walls had anticipated. The island became a school. Mandela and the other political prisoners organized themselves into something that functioned like a university. Underground, illegal, persistent. They taught each other. They debated. They discussed history, philosophy, economics, the nature of governance, the theory of resistance. He tended a small garden in the prison yard, a privilege he fought to be allowed, a few square feet of earth in which he grew tomatoes, chilies, onions. He said later that the garden taught him something essential about patience and about nurturing. That you cannot rush a seed. The government expected prison to break him. Instead, the prison refined him. He had gone into prison with anger, justifiable, burning, righteous anger. And he had learned, in those 7-foot walls, to transform that anger into something more dangerous. Clarity. February 11th, 1990. The world had been told it was coming, and still, when it actually happened, no one quite believed it. The gates of Victor Verster prison opened, and Nelson Mandela walked out. He was 71 years old. He had entered prison in the last season of his youth, and emerged in the winter of his life. His hair was gray. His sight was damaged. But his posture was the same, straight, composed, entirely present. He walked out holding Winnie's hand, raising his fist in the ANC salute, and the crowd that had been waiting outside exploded. Around the world, people stopped what they were doing. In offices, in living rooms, in streets, in schools. In countries where his name had been synonymous with the idea that injustice could be resisted, people stood and watched a television screen and felt something that is difficult to name but impossible to mistake. He was free. And now the world waited to see what a man who had been imprisoned for 27 years, whose wife had been brutalized, whose children had grown up fatherless, the world waited to see what such a man would do with his freedom. The expectation, in many corners, was rage. And who would have blamed him? He chose something else. Not immediately, and not without pain. He was not a man without fury. He had fury. He had decades of it, stored in the limestone quarry, in the 7-foot cell, in the funerals he could not attend. But he also understood something about the country he was walking back into. South Africa in 1990 was a pressure vessel. The anger of the oppressed, held under decades of violence and humiliation, and the fear of those who had done the oppressing, both capable of igniting a civil war that would consume everything and everyone. He had spent 27 years not only surviving prison but thinking, really thinking, about what kind of country he wanted to help build on the other side. And he had concluded that a country built on the foundation of revenge would not be a country. It would be a new version of the same poison. So he did something that shocked not just his enemies but many of his own people. He reached out to his oppressors. And then, on April 27, 1994, 30 years after the Rivonia trial, 27 years after the prison gates closed behind him, Nelson Mandela stood in a line and cast his first vote in the first free election of his life. He was 75 years old. He was elected President of South Africa. Power had completed its arc. And it had done so not through force, but through the exhausting, radical, almost incomprehensible discipline of choosing, again and again, the harder thing. So here is the question. The question you have been carrying since the courtroom, since the cell, since the gates opened on that February morning. Was it worth it? It is not a simple question, and anyone who answers it simply is not being honest with you. Because the truth is that Nelson Mandela paid a price that no person should ever have to pay. He lost his youth. He lost his children's childhoods. He lost the early years of his marriage, and the marriage itself was damaged in ways that prison and struggle had made irreparable. He lost 27 years. Not 27 years of confinement. 27 years of life. Real life. The kind you can't get back, regardless of what comes after. And yet, there is something else in this story. Something that goes beyond the political outcome. There is the question of what the decision itself revealed. Because what Nelson Mandela demonstrated, in that courtroom in 1964, is something that almost no one in history has been willing to demonstrate so clearly. He demonstrated that there is a kind of power that cannot be imprisoned. They locked him away. They took his voice from him, or tried to. They erased his image, banned his name, made it illegal to quote him. And yet, the idea could not be imprisoned. The idea of a man who chose justice over survival, who spoke the truth knowing it would cost him everything, who spent 27 years in a cell and came out without bitterness, that idea moved through walls. It crossed oceans. It sat in the conscience of people who had never been to South Africa. And it asked them the question that real power always asks. What would you be willing to lose? Because that is what power actually is. Not the ability to make others obey you. Not the control of resources, or armies, or the machinery of a state. Real power, the kind that outlasts the people who hold it, is the willingness to lose everything for a belief. And to do so without hatred. And to do so without the assurance that it will work. And to do so anyway. Most of us will never be asked to pay that price. Most of us will live our entire lives and the hardest choice we face will be a manageable one. Uncomfortable, perhaps, but manageable. But the smaller versions of that question arrive constantly. They arrive in offices and homes and conversations and the silence that follows when you know the right thing to say and say nothing. They arrive in the moment when the easy path and the honest path diverge. Nelson Mandela answered the question at its most extreme. He answered it fully. He paid in full. And in doing so, he did not just free a country. He gave everyone who has ever stood at that divergence a reference point. A proof of concept. A demonstration that it is possible. That one human being can be faced with the worst the world can do and choose, despite everything, to remain themselves. He lived to the age of 95. He stepped down after one term, voluntarily, at a time when he could easily have stayed. On the 5th of December 2013, Nelson Mandela died at his home in Johannesburg. In the days that followed, something remarkable happened across the world. People who had nothing to do with South Africa stopped in their ordinary days and felt something. Not just sadness. The grief of someone who has lost a proof. A proof that this is possible. That a human being can hold on to their humanity under pressure that would break most of us. That the right choice, even at enormous cost, is still the right choice. Some men gain power by holding on. Mandela gained it by letting everything go. The decision that cost him 27 years. That decision planted something in the ground of human possibility that no government, no prison, no system can uproot. It is still growing.